Welcome to the fourth episode of Dog Training Won't Solve Your Problem If. I'm Megan and I run Walk to Heal. And in this series, I'm talking with different dog professionals about why training alone isn't always enough. So these conversations ask us to see dogs in their wholeness and to imagine a relationship with their human kin based on reciprocity, challenging the top-down power over implication of the trainer paradigm. So today, I'm joined by Nora Lenz, who is the founder of Rotational MonoFeeding, and we're going to try and look at the link between diet and nutrition and cognition and learning. We're also going to look at disease and diet and how those two things are linked, as well as how caretakers can respect a dog's autonomy while also keeping them healthy. So, hi, Nora. It's really nice to have you here.
Sounds great. Hi, Megan. I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. So, Nora, you've founded this concept and this approach called rotational monofeeding as a nutritional philosophy for dogs. And I'd like to hear a bit of a lowdown about what that is for those who aren't familiar with it and how you came to it.
Okay, sure. I guess about 35, 40 years ago, I started learning about nutrition because what I really wanted to do was lose weight. And it just completely eluded me. I was always carrying around this extra 20 or 30 pounds. And so I saw these people they seemed to be eating constantly, but they were slim and trim like I wanted to be. So I was like, they really know about nutrition. Those people know about nutrition. I need to find out about that too. So I started studying it and applied, what I was learning to my diet. And then about that same time, maybe 10 years later, I'm kind of a slow learner. I started applying some of that information to dogs and it was in the 90s, so it was before the internet. So, nobody really had any solid information on how to feed dogs. There were a few breakout authors like Billingshurst and I guess Pitcairn, but he was kind of off, away from the natural model that I wanted to follow. So that was where Billingshurst, his books came into play. And what I had learned and what I started learning around the turn of the millennium was that humans really have a certain dietary range, and it's really best for us to not go, mixing different foods all in the same meal and complicating our digestive system with a bunch of different foods together that require different digestive chemistry in the gut in order to be digested. And I was learning that people who just stop making those crazy combinations in their meals, they actually enjoy health improvements, and that's all they do. They don't really change what they eat. They still eat the same foods. They just eat them separately. So I knew that. And I thought, we are monogastric. We have one chambered stomach, and so do dogs. And so I started thinking, not only do we know that different foods require different chemicals to be broken down, we can also look out in the wild and see that dogs don't go gathering one type of food and then gathering another type of food, taking it back to the den, putting it all together and eating it. And, people often counter that idea with, well, they eat the stomach contents of their prey, but they don't. When they're eating very small prey, of course, they don't have any choice. It's a very small amount of usually grasses, some seeds, that kind of thing in the guts of rabbits or, shrews or whatever small prey that they're eating. But when they have the option of not eating the stomach contents of their prey, they exercise it because the field researchers will see wolves taking the stomach out of their prey, shaking the contents loose, and then eating the tissue of the stomach itself. So we really, and what that tells me is that number one, they really don't like to mix their foods. And number two, maybe the bottom line with that is that they're not really set up to digest what's in that deer's stomach. And what's in that deer's stomach is partially digested leaves and grasses, right? Those aren't foods
Mhm.
for dogs. And dogs do eat grass, and even wolves eat grass, but nobody knows why. But they don't eat enough of it to make a meal out of it, and they generally eat it on an empty stomach. And there's a big theory that they don't eat it at all if they're healthy. I never see my dog eating grass. So anyway, I'm kind of getting off track there, but that's the main premise under rotational monofeeding. It's that dogs should be fed within their dietary biological adaptations
Mhm.
limitations,
Okay.
and that they should not have to be digesting starches and carbohydrates together with protein because it's a digestive mismatch. It's a basically a recipe for disease. So
Wow.
so that's the main thing. I mean, that's the thing that separates what I teach from any, prey model raw feeding teacher. Um, they don't feed many carbohydrates at all, and I do recommend feeding some carbohydrates separately from protein foods. I think they can serve a very important role in the diet. So, really, that's the essential part, and it's not just feeding; it's fasting also, and we can talk about fasting, but that's an essential part of understanding our dog's needs because people love to think that they're replicating nature and feeding their dogs what they're, biologically set up to eat. But and they love the feeding part, but they don't like the fasting part. And that's just as important as feeding to dogs because when we look out in the wild, we see them going without food a lot more than we see them eating. And they do gorge. They gorge and then they fast, which we really can't do with our domesticated dogs. But they still have long, long periods of digestive rest. And what we know is that during this condition of digestive rest, the body is able to direct more energy to healing and cleansing. And it produces really what people call healing miracles. It truly does. I've seen it with my own eyes and I've fasted myself. So anyway, we can talk about that, but that's an important component. And and just understanding, I guess nobody else that I'm aware of looks at a dog's age and condition and the preferences of the owner as far as whether they want to feed more plant foods or meat foods, all of those things. I mean, there's probably 10 or 15 factors that I take into account in rotational monofeeding when I'm trying to suggest feeding, you know, practices to people. Um, those are the things that I consider, and I don't know anybody else who's doing that.
Hmm.
But anyway, and I have a flow chart in my book that walks people through, how many plant foods to feed, how many fasting days to have in a week, the types of foods, and it it basically asks you questions and you give the answers, and it leads you down to the next, you know, step. So anyway, that's rotational monofeeding in a nutshell.
Okay, great. Thank you for that really rich explanation. And I really like this idea of modeling it after what a dog might eat in the wild and what their
Mhm.
natural diet is. And I'd
Right.
love to talk more about that in a sec, but maybe I would like to go into um, kind of the dog and maybe even the human food systems that um, we live in, because I think a lot of your work is about supporting dogs to kind of prevent or uh, to manage different dis-ease that they're experiencing. Am I correct in thinking that?
Well,
Um,
I don't really seek to manage disease at all. I want
okay,
to reverse it and
okay,
prevent it. And
okay,
management is for those people selling the pills.
okay. Fair, 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 fair. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I would love to talk a bit about that, like what you're seeing the link between what we're feeding our dogs and what that's doing to their physical health.
Mhm. Yeah, like what I was saying, management is a last resort. Management is something that you do when you've tried literally everything else to reverse the problem, and all you can do at this point is treat the symptoms and keep the dog more comfortable.
Yeah.
And the reason why that has been our go-to instead of our last resort like it should be is it makes lots of money for lots of people. And
Yeah.
that's the only reason, because the way that makes the most sense is to not have problems occur in the first place. And when they do some kind of forensic analysis and try to figure out what went wrong. It continues to astonish me. I'm fascinated by aviation and how much aviation has learned from studying its failures. And it's such a stark contrast from medicine because they never do that, ever. They keep
Right.
doing the same things over and over, managing, suppressing, cutting out, you know, cutting out organs that aren't, working the way they're supposed to, instead of figuring out what the underlying problem is. And even when they say they're looking at that causes, they've got these ideas about what causes disease that are completely unrelated to reality.
Right.
So, um,
Yes.
yes, there's obviously a very strong connection between what we eat, which creates every cell in our body, because our cells die, they don't live forever. We lose, millions of cells every day. I don't know if it's millions, hundreds of thousands. Lots of cells die every day in our bodies, and that's normal. That's supposed to happen. But what happens when people and dogs eat what they're not supposed to is cell death is accelerated, which means
Mhm.
they have to be replaced even more. And if the only place that the body can get the raw materials to make those new cells out of is what goes in your mouth, what goes
Yeah.
in your dog's mouth. So why wouldn't you get disease? Why wouldn't you get something substandard if you're putting in this ultra processed garbage that both dogs and humans eat?
Yeah, right. And it's exactly as you're saying, right? Like these systems, both the food system and the medical, like the Western medical model, like are profit driven, right? And they're based on extraction and exploitation and all of the ways that we've come, to all of the ways that food is produced and then manufactured and transported and sold. Like it comes and it's done very cheaply in order to be able to be produced en masse. And then
Mm.
um, all of that um, what am I trying to say? All of that gets downloaded onto, like, the individual who's then consuming the food, right? And that's actually, like,
Right,
literally felt at a cellular level.
right.
Um, and that's with what we're eating, and then we have this model that only looks at, like, treating symptoms, like giving you pills to kind of or whatever it is to kind of medicate,
Mm,
um what you're
mm.
experiencing, but symptoms are an expression of something that's going on, and the expression is not what we look at when we go through like Western medical interventions and without taking a holistic approach. Um,
And
and I'm
symptoms are
like,
so much bigger than that.
yeah,
Symptoms are the body trying to do something.
yes,
When you have a runny nose, your body is trying to get rid of something, and it's not a germ. It's not a germ. Your body wouldn't need to waste all of those fluids getting rid of something you can't even see with your naked eye. No, it's big stuff that your body's getting rid of, waste, and accumulation of waste. But this system of global food distribution that we have is a miracle. It's amazing. It's an incredible machine, but it's based, like you said, on profit. It is also based on a misunderstanding and ignorance about our needs as human beings. And so we have this, as a result, this animal agriculture system. And this is where it gets into what we feed our dogs, because we have animal agriculture that dominates the food distribution system. And in order to turn a profit, it has now become standard practice to fatten animals as much as possible. We breed them so that they can carry more fat. We make we create special foods for them so that they can carry more fat. We keep them sedentary so they carry more fat. And we also breed them so that they will have um, larger muscles or bigger, like chicken breasts and
Yeah.
chicken legs. If you've seen a chicken leg lately and compared it to like a wild bird leg, they used to call skinny people bird legs, right? But look at a chicken leg. That's a mutation. That's craziness.
Yeah.
Those chickens can't even fly, and their breasts are the same way because humans want to eat leg meat and breast meat, right? That's what they want. So what these producers have to do is they have to produce these little Frankenstein monsters. And
Yeah.
we want when the animal's dead, we want the muscle, but what are we going to do about the rest of it? What are we going to do about the rest of that stuff? And that's where the pet food industry came in because they're serving this vital role of playing disposal. They're the waste disposal arm of the global food distribution system or the animal agriculture system. And so they get what's left over, which is
Yeah.
fine if what they were creating in animal agriculture were wild animals, because we could give them the bones and the tendons and the beaks and the feet and the tails and all those things that we don't want to eat.
Hmm.
But what's mostly left, in addition to that, is this mountain of animal fat. And that's a problem. That's a problem with dogs because I don't know if you've ever had occasion to like skin a wild rabbit or defeather a wild bird, but I have because I wanted to see what was under there and I wanted to compare that to the animals that I buy from animal agriculture or that I buy on the commercial market. And there's just there's no fat there. There's very, very little fat. And when you compare it, I have pictures in my book to illustrate this, but when you compare it to a wild animal, fat is a luxury for them. Bears can carry fat because they can still function with all of that fat. They are very fast. If you've ever lived in bear country, you'll be told don't ever try to outrun a bear because they can move. They can move in spite of all that fat that they have. Well, the prey of dogs can't. They don't have the luxury of carrying a lot of fat, with the exception of some aquatic creatures, and those really don't figure prominently in the diets of dogs anyway. But it like hares and like pheasants, um, what shrews, other kinds of small rodents that field mice that wild dogs eat, they're all extremely lean. So that's the departure. And it seems like such a small thing to most people, I'm sure. Why are you blaming fat? What's wrong with fat? Everybody needs fat. Your brain's made of fat, right? Everybody wants to eat fat. So they love to hear good news about eating fat. But I'm here to tell you that it is a serious and stark departure from what dogs evolved eating. We are stuck with what dogs evolved eating because over the millions of years that they were evolving, their bodies were adapting to what they were eating then. And that's what we have to replicate. And that's what RMF looks at. So
Right.
that's where this lunacy that is the modern food system um, really impacts our dogs.
Yeah. So it's I guess again I really like that you're thinking about, okay, what if we could like take these dogs out of these like violent systems and look at what they would actually eat if they
Right.
were not domesticated, right? And looking like, okay, so maybe they'd be giving the same animal, or they'd be eating the same animal, but because of the way that we breed these dogs in this industrial agriculture system, not dogs, sorry, these animals in
Um,
industrial agriculture, the fat content is much higher. And that is one example of how what we're feeding them does not actually track on to what they need. And they have been evolving, as you say, for millions of years, right? And so have we. Like in human history, like what is the time period for in us being like eating from these systems and what that's doing to our bodies and how we have not evolved in any way to um, eat what we're now eating, like the diet that we have now. And I guess I'm also thinking like, okay, yeah, and also a wild animal is not going to be chalked with antibiotics and hormones and all of the like weird crap that gets put into animals when they're being bred to then be part
Right.
of our food system.
Right.
Um, yeah, so I guess I'm thinking about all of this, which is something that these dogs are consuming a couple times a day, how important like food is for the physical health of a dog. And then I'm also wondering about like what the impact this might have on their ability to learn and understand or their emotions or that side of
Mhm.
things. Because I guess um, the reason why I wanted to have this conversation in this series is I want to think about all of the reasons why training just isn't this like linchpin or this like thing that solves all of our issues with dogs because
Mhm.
a lot of the work that I do, for example, is about helping a dog who's feeling like chronically aroused or in a state of distress feel safe in their body, in their relationships, in their environment. And all of that needs to happen before we can think about any kind of like what you might think is like standard dog training,
Mhm.
because their ability to learn when they're in that chronic state of arousal just isn't there. Like
Mhm.
they're not in that learning zone. So I guess I'm just wondering like what the um, role
Mm.
nutrition might be playing in this as well.
Right. Well, I would, just to answer the operative question here, what if training won't solve your problem? I mean, training won't solve your problem if, and it kind of trails off, but I would fill in the blank by saying if your dog's behavior is impacted or influenced or created by what he's eating. And if that's the case, then what you have to do is, especially if training isn't working, and a lot of this has to be inferred because nobody is studying this stuff. And if they are studying it, they've got pet industry backing, so we can't trust the results. I suppose there might have been some obscure, university studies that looked at various nutrients and how they affect animals in various ways. But I'm talking about something bigger because when I changed my diet, and I think a lot of people have to use their own experiences, or at least it gives them a springboard to think about how diet affects other species too. But when I changed my diet, I know that my behavior, my mentality, my perspective, my emotions, everything changed. And it was so unexpected. It wasn't something that I could have created because it was completely spontaneous. It was like I just realized one day that I was feeling happy for no reason at
Mm,
all.
mm,
Ugly gray day, and
yeah,
I had these feelings of bliss coming up from inside, and I was like, "What's going on with that? Why am I so happy?" And the only thing that I could connect it to was I had changed my diet a year before. And since that was 25 years ago, and since then, I've continued to see more indications of how what I eat creates my emotions. You can eat a food and within a couple of hours be feeling sad. And it's
yeah,
become so obvious. If you experience that a few hundred times, you go, "Oh, I think that food isn't good for me. It makes me feel bad." Who knew?
yeah,
But
yeah. I'm thinking about. I'm sorry.
no, go ahead. You think
Just like a simple, like you're talking about, making big changes to your diet and like tracking what that change looks like over a year. But I even think that we can just, you know, get in people's imagination for a bit and think about like what you have for breakfast. Like sometimes, you might have a croissant and then you get to work and what depends on what you're working, like what your job is, but maybe you like have to sit at a desk and then, you have a coffee because you're kind of foggy and then you're not really, and then the day goes on and you're crashing in the afternoon. So you eat some more sugar and, you've not really had sustained energy throughout the
all
entire
day.
day.
Right.
Right. And then you think about, okay, the next morning you've got a bit more time. Maybe you make some eggs, you have something that's like more proteinous and you've got like something that hasn't spiked your blood sugar and you have that sustained energy and you can just feel more calm, more focused in whatever your workday is. And like that's just like something that's like really small and tangible that we can think about in terms of like the difference in one day and what we're eating and our ability
Right.
to kind of focus. And um I think it's interesting, that you're saying that there's not a lot of research done on this topic with dogs, right? And that, given what we were talking about earlier, with the kind of profitable industries, that makes sense that there's not been this research that's been done. But it is,
Right.
kind of almost common sense to be able to make these inferences, right? When we think about our own experiences or like our own knowledge around how eating absolutely affects how we feel and our ability to concentrate and focus. Um, why that wouldn't be the case for a dog or any animal that's being fed something that is like so far away from what they're been evolved to eat. Like, why
Right.
wouldn't that make sense, right?
Yes. I think it's a stretch to say that, intractable behavior issues can be resolved with diet. I think that diet is bigger than that. And I really think that people should be feeding their dogs real food. They should be going to the grocery store. We're stuck going to the grocery. That's where we have to buy our food. So that's where we have to buy their food too. And it's there. Everything that we need is at the grocery store right down the street where we buy our own food. And I just think that is like, that offers us a baseline, a foundation of a healthy dog so that we can know for sure that these behavior issues aren't caused by that they feel bad, that they have low energy, that they're feeling angry. I mean, it's true that though that food can have those effects on humans. So why wouldn't it have those effects on dogs too? And I think that's where you have to start. And I think it all comes together. The training, the behavior modification, whatever you want to call it, and making sure that a dog is comfortable physically, making sure that they have psychological security, make sure they get a little bit of exercise every day. All of those things come together. And I think they're important if you want to reach behavior goals that will allow your dog to live harmoniously with you.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, which is what the aim is, right? It's about
Right.
finding harmony with our dogs and giving them what they need so they can achieve that. And I think there's also like maybe even like if there's not a direct, if we can't say that science has told us, right, that there's like a link between what a dog is eating and their behavior, maybe the middle step is what you were talking about before and our understanding that like what a dog is eating is influencing their physical health in terms of like disease, pain, discomfort. And we know like that is such a standard thing that we know in the training realm is that
Mhm.
every time I've got a new client come in, the first thing I say is, have you ruled out pain? you know have you
Right.
ruled out discomfort, right?
Right.
Do we know if there's some sort of underlying um illness or tension or uncomfortability that they're experiencing physically that is driving behavior? So
Right.
those links have been made and there and so we can kind of make that more that little three-step link between
Right. And
diet.
I get this feedback all the time from people who are starting RMF or have been doing RMF with their dogs for, a few months, because they'll notice that their old dog will interact with the young dog more, or he'll go over to the toy box that he hasn't been to for years and pull a toy out and start playing with it. And that's those feelings, those same feelings that I had when I first changed my diet. That's those feelings manifesting in the dog because that's how they show their energy and caring about things, wanting to play, wanting to engage, wanting to be attentive. That all requires energy, and energy is a very physical thing. I mean, it's true science. It's bioscience, right? Either your body is creating energy or a dog's body is creating energy or it's not. And if it's not able to create energy, then a dog's not going to care. It's like when people suffer this clinical depression, they say they don't even want to get out of bed. They don't well, that's just the failure of the body to create energy, and it's sending the message to the brain, you don't care about anything. You don't have the energy to care about anything. So that makes us think that it's some kind of mental disorder, but it's not a mental disorder. It's a physical disorder. It's a physical failure of the body to be able to create energy. So that's where you have to start. And trying
Mm.
to treat something like that, like depression, with, just talking to somebody or even worse, giving them pills is so backward. It's just so backward. And so I think that we can learn a lot about the failure on the part of our, of humans to stay mentally healthy and physically healthy. We can use that failure to recognize that we're doing the same thing to our dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? About the importance of learning from doing it wrong.
Our
Um,
mistakes. Exactly. Right.
maybe the medical industry can take a leaf from our book here.
Right.
I want to pivot a bit and go back to something that you raised at the beginning when you were talking about, um, the kind of what rotational model feeding is aiming to do, right? It's aiming to recreate a wild diet, um, because it's challenging all of the kind of like disease and profit driven kind of values of the kind of of the dog food system, right?
Mhm.
And I want to talk about so you've got this idea of fasting,
Mhm.
which I'm aware that is maybe a bit of a controversial topic,
Yeah.
and I just maybe want to speak to that a bit, because I think, what I hear, what you're trying to do is recreate a diet that a dog would have, and they would have meat, in one instance, and then they might have some more herbaceous food in another, and then there would be times when they're not eating, right? And I know that that is something that is a criticism of rotational monofeeding. And I guess when I was reading about this and trying to understand it, I guess the thing that I was thinking about when I thought, okay, well, what would be my concern around this? I guess it would be around consent, right? I'm thinking, how do we engage with a dog ability to consent to fasting? Um, which then leads me to another question of like, okay, but how do we get them to consent about any of this food that we're feeding them, and how
Right.
and when and what? Um, but yeah, I just wonder if you could speak a bit about like engaging with consent in your feeding model.
Right. Well, you hit on it right there because dogs really have no agency. They have no autonomy at all. They're very limited in our domestic circumstances. And I think the very least that we can do is replicate what their experience might be in the wild food wise. And what we see when we look out into the wild is we see dogs historically living on the brink of starvation. Right now, there's an area in northern Minnesota, um, and it's called the Voyagers. I don't know why it's called this, but the area is called the Voyagers, and the wolf packs that are studied are called the Voyager wolf packs. And there's a team that's doing all this research, and they've done lots of observing field observations of these wolves. And what they find is really illuminating what we know about what dogs should be eating and not eating. And in this little microcosm, and it's really important to point out that these wolves are there endemically. They weren't brought in. They were there before we were, long before we were, before humans were. And so it's, there are human populations that are impinging on what goes on with the wolves, obviously, because they're always encroaching. Human habitation is always encroaching. This particular area is not especially um, inhabitable by humans because it's very cold in the winter, and they have a very short, growing season. But what they find is that 80% of the pups don't survive to adulthood. 80%. This last year, and they're having a bit of an anomalous situation right now because they've had some rough winters for the last few years. But um, in all of the packs that they studied this last year, one pup came out of each pack. One pup survived to adulthood. So, and they do have these population fluctuations, but so, and we see that wherever wolves are studied, they are, and wild dogs in general, they are extremely fuel efficient. They invented the word fuel efficiency. They eat very little and they can go very long periods and very long distances on that amount of fuel that they eat. And, truth be told, it would probably be the case with all animals, including humans, that we have a lot more fuel efficiency than we realize we do. So what that tells us is that there is great value in keeping dogs lean and without getting them close to the brink of starvation, um, giving them adequacy without excess. And when you have a species that has lived throughout its history on the brink of starvation, it's very, very easy to exceed adequacy and go into excesses. And it is my contention that most disease of domestic dogs that plagues domestic dogs is caused by excesses. And that the idea that deficiency features prominently in dog disease has been planted in our brains by this industry that wants to sell us supplements, oils, drugs, pills, all kinds of, stuff that dogs don't need. Because, and I've seen this over and over and over and over hundreds of times, when the excesses are removed from a dog's diet, excess food in general, excess fat, excess meat, excess indigestible food, when all of those excesses are removed from a dog's life, they get well. They just get well. And all kinds of conditions that people are taught to regard as um, incurable, terminal, whatever. We don't know that anything is terminal until we try everything we know in our power to replicate nature, and it still results in the death of the dog. And that's extremely rare. That turns out to be extremely rare. So, anyway, that's fasting in a nutshell. Now, when it comes to utilizing it in civilized circumstances, we have to take control because, like you said, they don't consent to anything. They don't consent to being sick. If I have the choice between fasting my dog and going to a vet and having their symptoms suppressed every 6 months, doing that cyclically, instead of knowing that I could fast my dog and then feed him properly and continue to fast him periodically and never have to go to the vet, never have to experience a symptom in my dog, never have to watch my dog suffer, I'll go fast my dog. Because that, you know what? We suffer a lot more when we fast our dogs than they do. I have fasted dozens of dogs and they don't suffer. They don't suffer the way we imagine they do. we have this idea in our heads because, people like to pretend that dogs are little humans, right? That they have the same thinking processes that we humans do. And a little human might go, Mommy, why aren't you feeding me today? This isn't fair. Are you punishing me for something? That's not necessarily how dogs think. Dogs, if a dog isn't fed, he's just gone, well, this is unusual, that usually when I walk to the kitchen, there's food in the bowl and there isn't today. And well, I guess I'll just go back to sleep. They don't go, she must hate me. I must have done something wrong. Dogs don't think like
Right,
that.
they're not logically, or they're not reasoning as to what the
Right.
situation
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Um,
But
yeah, I think this is such a tension that I come up with in my work a lot of the time, because one of the values in my kind of like philosophy method, how I work with dogs, is autonomy, right? And it's like prioritizing their autonomy and helping them, feel like they have agency and consent, and can in the agency in their day-to-day lives, and can consent to, how we're interacting with them, and what they do, is really important, and also almost impossible in this domesticated context, right? Where we are making decisions about every little aspect of their lives, right? From what they're eating, from the time of day that they go to the toilet, from what dogs they can meet and not meet. There's just so much choice that is removed from them,
right.
from their day-to-day life, and there's like loads of ways that we can introduce that. Like a small example is like having their toys accessible, right? So they can feel like, I can choose that toy. Um, but I think this is a constant tension, right? Of being like, okay, I want to prioritize your autonomy, and also I have power in this situation. I live in a human centered world. I am the one who's making all the decisions about your life, your well-being. Your well-being is in my hands, right? So, um, like taking responsibility for that power is
Right.
is quite important, and also is something that is really important to engage in from an ethical perspective, because it's like, okay, what is the responsible thing to do right now? Is it what, one situation that you've described, where I'm feeding you every day because that's what I'm understanding and is the norm here, and you need to be fed every day? Or
Mhm.
do I do something that's quite a radical departure from that? That is an attempt to replicate what you would eat in the wild, but
Right.
yeah. So it's just, I don't think there's like a right, wrong, this, that answer, but I just think it is something that is in tension, and like, you know, ultimately is something that is hopefully these decisions are made based on the priority of a dog's well-being, I
Right.
guess.
And in my world, fasting is mostly done in response to symptoms. I mean, I fast my dog a couple of days per week just to provide her with sufficient digestive rest. It's extremely important. I can't imagine feeding her every day and the symptoms that I would have to deal with in her. She's a Cocker Spaniel. She's got these horrible ears, that when waste comes through her ear canals, which is what happens when dogs are misfed, it creates all kinds of mess in there. So we really need to give the body enough time to digest and utilize all the fuel in order to decrease this waste that's coming through. But like I said, in my world, fasting mostly is used to address symptoms,
Mm.
because when dogs historically have been injured or sick, they go to the darkest, quietest place they can find, and people often have these experiences in their own life. I have, when I've had injured animals before, and they find a closet and they stay
Yeah.
there until they are well, until they're able to hunt again, and nobody brings them food. Nobody spoons, liquids into their mouths. Like, this is the idea that we have about proper care of the sick, right? Well, that's not part of the dog's world. Historically, they heal themselves. Their bodies heal themselves, and we see this all the time when we watch the wolves on the trail cams, because they get horrible injuries in the course of food acquisition, and they they heal from them, and they can sometimes even manage to still acquire food when they've got broken legs and whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, But if they can't acquire food, then, and many times they don't have the option of acquiring food, they just have to wait until their bodies heal. And that's what nature imbued them with, the ability, the body's ability to heal, just like it did us. I fasted myself for 18 days. So I know that, I know what can be achieved during the condition of a fast, an extended fast. And that's what sort of separates my message from other people, because the raw feeding community is pretty behind the concept of fasting a dog 1 day per week. They're okay with that. I'm talking about going beyond that in order to affect some really deep healing and cleansing. And it's not as scary as everybody thinks it is. It's not as scary to fast a dog multiple days as everybody thinks. It's a healing miracle, actually, and I think that's a big reason why it's discouraged in medicine, because it's a healing miracle. It's
Yeah.
competition for them.
And these medical systems, they don't like there is like a distrust of the body, right? You're talking about
Yes,
the like
yes,
body's innate wisdom to heal, right?
right.
And we are told that, the body is less than the mind. That the body is something to be tamed, something to have willpower over, something, so there's not this reverence for it and what it can do. And
It's more like military. It's a military
yeah.
strategy. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really respect what you're doing. I really respect that you're going after these systems from challenging the medical industry and challenging the kind of the food systems that are really they don't have our interest in mind. Like I believe this at my core when I think about like humans, right? And so much of my work I end up just like going, oh, same for dogs, and so I'm just
right.
like really it's been really interesting talking to you about what this means but in the dog world. So Nora, where can people find you? What are you up to?
Well, I have a website called rotationalmonofeeding.com and a Facebook group by the same name. And I have a subscription group um, on Facebook. And you can participate even if you're not on Facebook. I do live streams every week. I take questions, do Q&As every week. And I do little like discussion groups where the members, subscription members, 3 members and I sit down and look what they're feeding their dog, and I make suggestions, and we do tweaking and that sort of thing. I have a book, and I'm a terrible marketer, so I don't happen to have a copy handy.
That's okay.
But
I'll make sure to link it.
okay, good. It's sold on the website, and it explains everything, so that it all makes sense. And that's what I hear mostly from people who read it, who follow the method. It makes sense. So, and it works. It works. Keeps dogs out of the vet's office for life.
Right.
For life.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I really enjoyed this.
Sure. Thank you for the invite. It was fun.
Yeah, cool. Great.
Have a good evening, Megan.
Yeah, you too. Thanks and goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining.